Sometimes in life, there's a moment when everything inside you just wants to stop. Not because you're giving up, but because something deeper is calling your attention. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe that moment is happening for you. It begins almost like a whisper. Stop, my child. Hear me now. There's a tenderness in that invitation, isn't there? It's the kind of voice that doesn't accuse, doesn't pressure, just sees you. Sees the weight you've been carrying, the confusion you've been trying to push through, the silent battle inside your own mind as you try to hold on to a little bit of peace. We all know that feeling when you're still functioning, still doing what needs to be done, yet something inside feels unsettled, shifting. And here's the thing, that shift is not random. It's not one of those emotional waves that come and go without meaning. Sometimes life shakes you because something sacred is being built within the shaking. Maybe you've felt that lately, like the ground beneath your feet is rearranging, but in a strangely purposeful way. Imagine someone telling you, I am establishing a sacred structure around your life. Not a temporary shelter, not a band-aid solution, but an entire spiritual architecture designed specifically for you. Something intentional, precise, almost architectural, like your life is being realigned beam by beam, foundation stone by foundation stone. And then the reassurance deepens. I am creating a sacred boundary around you. A boundary not meant to keep the world away, but to keep what is pure inside of you safe. A boundary so strong that nothing in this world or beyond can cross it. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly feel protected, but you can't explain why? Or you feel a strange clarity right after a season of chaos? Sometimes that clarity is the first sign that something divine is moving things around, creating space, carving out room for something new. This part of the journey isn't about doing more. It's about stopping long enough to recognize what's unfolding around you. It's the pause before the breakthrough, the silence before the direction becomes clear. And maybe, just maybe, this is exactly the moment you were meant to hear, that gentle call. Stop. Hear me now. Held, lifted, and unshaken. If you've ever tried to hold on to peace while the world around you keeps tugging at you, you know how fragile it can feel. One small doubt, one unexpected setback, and suddenly the balance inside begins to wobble. And the truth is, there are forces, external and internal, that wait for exactly that moment. Forces that whisper, see, you're slipping again. But here's the message you often forget, you're not slipping. You're being steadied. Sometimes the divine doesn't remove the weight, you're simply given stronger hands to hold it. These words, this message, wasn't given to frighten you. It was given to help you settle into this strong protection. Almost like someone is gently placing their hands on your shoulders and reminding you to breathe, to stop fighting the wrong battles, to recognize that the strength holding you is bigger than the pressure pressing against you. And then there's this promise, quiet but powerful. You will remain unshaken. Not because life will suddenly calm down, but because the foundation beneath you is being reinforced in ways you cannot yet see. Your journey has been noticed. Your prayers, even the ones you whispered half hoping someone would hear, have been answered. And then comes a line many people overlook, but it is so important. You are not falling. You are being lifted. There is a difference. Falling feels like losing control. Being lifted feels like something greater than you is raising you above what once overwhelmed you. And that's the truth here. You are important enough to be protected. You are valued enough for heaven to intervene, not occasionally, but continuously. This isn't temporary shielding. This isn't a short season of grace or a brief moment of spiritual comfort. The message says it plainly. This is a settled truth. Not for a short time, but for all time. No more random emotional attacks knocking you off balance. No more unexpected disruptions stealing your peace. If you've ever felt like life hits you out of nowhere, this is the moment that cycle ends. Imagine living from a place where you don't question your stability every morning. Imagine feeling supported even when you're tired, lifted even when you're unsure. That is what divine protection feels like, not dramatic, not loud, but steady and constant. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you can breathe knowing you're not breaking, you're being held. The quiet that heals you. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, it feels holy. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of being protected. And when a deep quiet starts settling inside you, even while the world outside seems loud and chaotic, that's when you know something sacred is happening. The message says that anyone who once drained your energy, emotionally, spiritually, will now find the doorway closed. Not because you've hardened your heart, but because something wiser is guiding what gets access to you. This protection isn't random, it answers to divine guidance. It knows what needs to stay and what must leave. And in that new quietness, something shifts. Suddenly, confusion clears. You begin to see the difference between noise and truth. Your mind stops racing in circles. The obsessive thoughts, old anxieties, and that constant internal buzzing you could never seem to silence, they're being cut off at the root. Because peace, the real kind, never comes from perfect circumstances. It comes from presence, divine presence, from feeling watched over, from sensing that something larger than you is tending to your inner world. Then comes the transformation that many people fear, being made pure, not in a moralistic way, but in a deeply human way. It's the moment your hidden wounds start dissolving, when the emotional clutter you've carried for years begins to fall away, when the heaviness lifts, not suddenly, but steadily, like someone opening a window in a dusty room. And something beautiful happens next. You begin to know yourself again, not the version of you shaped by disappointment or survival mode, but the version you were before the world told you who you had to be. Your thoughts sharpen, your emotions become clearer, your inner compass stops spinning and points toward truth again. Maybe you've felt this lately, those fleeting moments of clarity when you think, wait, I feel different. That's not your imagination. That's your spirit being reset. You're not becoming someone new. You're returning to someone true. This quiet is not emptiness. It's restoration. It's preparation. It's the ground where your next chapter begins to grow. Seeing the mask fall. There's a peculiar clarity that arrives when the masks around you start to slip. You know the type, people who once seemed safe, smiling in the right moments, showing up with polite words. But behind those smiles, there were strings pulling at you, small drains on your spirit you learned to ignore. And now, something changes. Those pathways that felt secure begin to look different. You start sensing the danger hidden in plain sight. This isn't paranoia. The message here is clear. This is not unfounded suspicion. It's clear spiritual awareness. Think of it like your inner radar being recalibrated. Where you once hesitated because you didn't want to offend or rock the boat, now you feel a subtle alarm, an unease that isn't loud but is unmistakably real. Often, it shows as a tightening in the chest before words are spoken or a stillness in your gut when someone's intent doesn't match their smile. What's striking is the way truth reveals itself without you needing to argue. The falsehoods that once required explanations begin to unravel under their own weight. Conversations that seemed harmless turn heavy. People expose themselves through their own words. You'll notice relationships becoming strained, not because you're looking for conflict, but because the truth has to make space. Some will leave. This is not abandonment, It's what the text calls a sacred separation. It's the clearing of space you didn't know you needed. I've seen this in my own life. Friendships that lingered out of loyalty but drained joy. Partnerships that required constant explanation. When the masks dropped, it was painful for a season, but liberating in the long run. The people who remained were those aligned with honesty, virtue, and shared purpose. So ask yourself, who in your life consistently leaves you lighter, and who seems to take from you under the guise of care? That question is not judgment, it's discernment. Your path now asks for truthfulness, integrity, and loyalty. The road ahead requires companions who contribute to clarity, not confusion. This shift doesn't make you unkind, it makes you wiser. As the masks fall, your focus sharpens. You begin to move intentionally, surrounded by those whose presence affirms your direction. The cost of losing false connections is far less than the price of staying tethered to illusions. Sacred strength and forward momentum. There's a moment when uncertainty dissolves into conviction, and tasks that used to feel heavy become almost effortless. The voice tells you plainly, your certainty will rise strongly. What follows is not a boastful power, but a sacred acceleration, an ease to move forward with clarity and speed. Imagine carrying a load that suddenly feels lighter because the straps were repaired. Your steps are not rushed, but they're no longer stalled. This new energy is described as sacred, meant for purpose rather than pride. That matters. There's a subtle temptation to use newfound momentum for self-promotion, to chase visible success as proof of worth. The guidance here is firm. Use this strength to fulfill the calling you've been entrusted with, not to stage manage your image. When motivation is anchored in service, it sustains. When it's driven by ego, it burns out. You'll notice the fog of doubt thinning. Decisions that once took weeks now arrive with surprising speed. Complex problems simplify because your inner compass is being adjusted. I am adjusting your inner compass. That phrase is a promise that your instincts will align with truth. You won't be swept by every opportunity that glitters. Instead, you'll feel which doors are real and which are distractions. Protection extends beyond the spiritual. It wraps around body, emotions, and mind. That's important because real work requires whole person care. When your spirit is guarded, your physical stamina and emotional resilience follow. Tasks that used to drain, you will get done with less friction. People will notice, not because you're loud about it, but because your presence carries a different weight. Sometimes others wonder aloud where your calm comes from. You won't need to explain. Your life becomes testimony. Think of this like a season of acceleration, not for self-aggrandizement, but for stewardship. What if the next project you start, the next conversation you have, or the next risk you take were all guided by this renewed clarity? What if your priorities aligned so tightly with purpose that wasted motions simply fell away? The call here is to steward this sacred energy wisely. Keep asking, does this move honor the path you've been given? If yes, proceed. If no, let it pass. There's a liberation in moving with divine speed, where progress is not frantic, but precise. And when you move like that, the world notices not because of showiness, but because of truth in motion. Fully covered, strength that holds. There's a phrase that holds a kind of relief. You are now fully enclosed from all sides, inside and out. Imagine the sense of being wrapped in a protection that is careful enough to guard your body, wise enough to steady your emotions, and deep enough to cradle your spirit. This is not merely a poetic image. It's a practical promise that vulnerability does not have to be your default setting. Where you once felt exposed, there is now reinforcement. Weak points, those places where past hurts left you sensitive, are being mended. The mind that once wandered into anxiety now finds a steadiness. The heart that feared betrayal learns caution without cynicism. This coverage is comprehensive because true resilience isn't merely surface-level toughness. It's an integrated restoration of self. With protection comes responsibility. The voice makes that clear. Strength is paired with a sacred trust. That means the power you receive is not for reckless display. Old temptations and patterns that once reigned will lose their pull, not by your willpower alone, but because the inner architecture has changed. You'll feel less drawn to destructive cycles. That freedom is a gift and a test. Will you live differently now that you can? Transformation follows protection. Things that formerly drew you in, habits, relationships, ways of thinking, begin to feel foreign not because you are judging, but because your inner life now calibrates to a new standard. The phrase, "you are being transformed," isn't about perfection. It's about becoming whole in a way that supports the life you're called to live. And how do you live with this covering? The counsel is practical. Live with a clean heart and follow your inner guidance. That sacred guide will nudge you, sometimes through quiet conviction, sometimes through an unmistakable clarity in a simple conversation. It will not shame you for past errors. It will simply redirect you toward honesty and purpose. One personal note: in seasons where I felt most watched and defended, I also felt most accountable to myself and to the people I serve. There is a humility that grows when protection is not taken for granted. You begin to ask better questions. Am I stewarding this strength well? Who benefits from my peace? How does my presence stabilize others? This protection invites practical changes, boundaries that preserve energy, choices that reflect new priorities, and rhythms that sustain rather than deplete. The result is a life that is steadier, clearer, and more capable of carrying meaning beyond your individual moment. Guided steps, knowing before trouble knows you. There's a kind of companionship that feels less like a presence at your side and more like a quiet map placed in your hands. That's what this season brings. Not chaos avoided by chance, but a steady guidance that knows the terrain ahead. The message says it plainly. You have a companion, an internal guide that's been programmed to warn you, to sharpen your awareness, and to lead you when the way becomes unclear. Think of it as a GPS for the soul. Sometimes the voice comes like a small nudge in a conversation, sometimes as a restless night when a decision won't let you sleep. Other times it's the sudden sense not to take a meeting, to delay a move, or to walk away from a situation that, at first glance, looked promising. These prompts are not paranoia. They are practical, spiritual intuition, an early warning system tuned to protect your path. There's also a strange paradox here. When the world seems to crumble, you're the one who finds freedom. While others reel in the collapse, your inner steadiness is what pushes you forward. The text calls it being wrapped in something you cannot see, but it cannot be broken. That image is useful. It's like being clothed in armor. You don't have to polish, something that secures you while you keep doing the work you were made for. Your past pain, the nights you wonder if it was worth it, those things are not wasted. The line, "The pain did not end you. It formed you," is an unapologetic truth. Pain refines attention. It teaches you which doors are worth opening and which voices to ignore. I've watched people take what felt like a defeat and years later point to it as the moment their clarity began. It's not romanticizing suffering. It's seeing purpose in the shaping. So, how do you live with this guidance daily? Start by listening. Quiet time isn't indulgence, it's reconnaissance. Notice the small warnings, a heaviness in your stomach, a restlessness you can't explain, the way a person's words don't land right. Ask yourself practical questions. Does this align with where I feel led? Will this choice protect my capacity to serve the larger purpose I sense in my life? Over time, these micro decisions form a pattern of wisdom. Finally, remember this: discernment sometimes means missing out. Doors will close that look attractive. That's part of the protection. The closed door is often the hand that keeps you from walking into a long season of repair. If you stay attentive, you'll learn to welcome the quiet alarms, because they save your energy for what truly matters. Sacred rhythm, discipline that doesn't feel oppressive. When people hear the word discipline, they imagine drills and deprivation. But the kind of discipline this message describes is more like building a house with intention, framing, insulation, steady work, so life can hold more light. This season calls for structure, not to box you in, but to set a platform where your presence can do what it was meant to do. Failures you faced aren't detours, they're blueprints. Each misstep showed you what collapsed under strain. Use that information. The instruction to live with focused intention is not a call to monastic austerity. It's an invitation to practical rituals that protect you. Simple things like consistent reflection, a morning habit that centers you, or boundaries that let you conserve attention for what matters. Structure becomes the soil where constancy grows. Balance matters here. Spiritual practices, emotional care, and physical rest are not separate trades, but woven threads. You can't excel in one while neglecting the others without paying a price. Think of athletes who train with coaches, rest intentionally, and fuel their bodies. Similarly, a life of purpose needs supportive rhythms. This isn't perfection, it's stewardship. Ask yourself, what small daily routine gives you clarity? Is it 5 minutes of quiet before the day begins? A weekly check-in with someone who knows you? Or a daily cutoff from email so your head can recompose? These tiny patterns are the scaffolding for holy work. The goal is to create an environment where your inner life can hold presence without constantly patching leaks. There is also a posture the message names, the posture of the heart. That's not performance, it's readiness, an inward orientation that says, I am prepared to carry this responsibly. It translates into gentleness and toughness in the right measure. You become someone who can bear presence without being swallowed by it, who can receive responsibility without being crushed. I've noticed when people adopt sacred routines, they don't become rigid, they become available. Their decisions gain clarity, their relationships are less volatile, and their capacity for sustained influence grows. Discipline done rightly doesn't numb life, it magnifies it. So consider making one small, intentional change this week. Protect a slice of your morning, say no to one draining request, or set a boundary that preserves your energy. See how that single act gathers momentum. Over time, those small choices become a holy cadence that carries you forward, steady, clear, and whole. Clearing ground, letting the old make way for the true. There's a season when the work is demolition rather than decoration. It can be unsettling because demolition looks, at first, like loss. But what if clearing the old is the only way the new can take safe root? That's the task at hand. Remove the pillars that were never built on truth, let go of coping mechanisms born from wounds, and clear the soil so something resilient can grow. The process isn't about punishment, it's about honesty. Some things you clung to were never meant to be lasting. Certain friendships that asked more of you than they gave. Identities you built to survive rather than to thrive. Expectations that stifled growth. When these patterns are cleared, it may feel shaky. That's because the loose structures are falling away, necessary if uncomfortable. Pay attention to what feels foreign as you make this shift. Old comforts may still call. Nostalgia can be persuasive. But there's a difference between sentimental memory and a ruin that will collapse under the next storm. Ask, does this belief or relationship support the person I am becoming, or is it a rerun of an old script? When the ground is cleared and foundations reset, your voice gains weight. That doesn't mean you'll be louder. It means your presence carries consequence. People notice. Opportunities come not because you chase them, but because the life you inhabit now resonates differently. That resonance is earned by the discipline and honesty of the clearing process. This phase often includes hard choices, walking away from what once defined you, saying no to comfortable patterns, or admitting you were wrong. Those moves are costly but catalytic. They create a platform where integrity, influence, and clarity can land and stay. I'll be candid, this is the work I've most resisted in my life. It's easier to keep the familiar scaffolding and pretend it's sturdy. But every time I've cleared something honest, a relationship, a role, an old expectation, the new that followed felt truer and more sustainable. The cost of short-term security is often a long-term shrinking. So as you stand in this clearing, give yourself permission to grieve what fades and gratitude for what's being made possible. Plant small anchors, a morning practice, a conversation that speaks truth, a boundary you keep. Those anchors become the beginning of a solid foundation. Remember, when the old is cleared rightly, your words gain weight, your presence changes atmosphere, and the life that grows is one built to last. Move forward, influence purpose and the new you. There comes a season when your name starts showing up in places you never expected. Not because you chased it, but because the life you've quietly been building begins to carry weight. The message is simple. You will be noticed, and what you say and do will matter. That's not vanity, it's stewardship. It means your influence is being reoriented toward the things that last. Imagine someone you used to be. Cautious, apologetic, soft with your edges because the world taught you to shrink. Now imagine that version of you replaced with someone who moves with steady confidence. Your certainty will rise, the voice says. This certainty doesn't erase challenge, but gives you a steadier footing when challenge arrives. Tasks that used to eat up your energy will move faster. Decisions land with clarity. People will remark on the calm in your presence, not because you perform calm, but because your inner architecture is different. There will be opposition. That's part of re-entering the world from a new center. Old defenses like fear, defensiveness, and hurried reactions will feel out of place and slowly fall away. Instead of reacting, you'll respond. Instead of surviving, you'll steward. The transformation is not about erasing your history. It's about redirecting the lessons of it. The pain you once carried becomes a kind of crucible that forged a steadier presence. A practical lens helps here. When opportunity knocks, ask, does this align with the peace you've been given? Does it honor the clarity you now have? If the answer is yes, move. If not, let it pass. This isn't timidity, it's discernment. Living in this new way means the frenetic push for approval stops. Your work advances because it matters more than applause. There's also a deeper truth. Your renewed life carries a responsibility. You don't just gain influence to stroke your ego. You gain it to lead, to uplift, to open doors for others who are still finding their footing. The quiet confidence you develop becomes a resource for someone else's courage. So step forward with intention. Speak the small truths. Do the steady work. Don't panic when recognition arrives. Let it be the byproduct of faithfulness. And when you face trials, remember, you are being shaped to carry impact that won't fade. The world will notice not because you shouted louder, but because your presence now changes the atmosphere in a room. That is real influence. And it starts with being willing to move forward as the person you've been prepared to become. Sacred solitude, alone yet not lonely. There's a distinct kind of solitude that comes with deep purpose. It's not the loneliness of being forgotten. It's the quiet of being set apart. The message says it plainly. Not everyone will understand your journey, and that's okay. In fact, this sacred solitude is part of the calling. It's the space where refinement happens. You'll notice relationships shifting. Some won't stay because they were built on the old you, on convenience, comfort, or shared patterns that no longer fit. That separation can feel abrupt and sometimes painful because we naturally want validation from those we've invested in. Yet the text reminds us this calling arrived because of faithful, often unseen choices you made before anyone applauded. You were tending a trust in private, and that private tending matters more than public approval. Being set apart also changes how you accept praise or opposition. You learn to root your sense of worth not in applause, but in obedience. That's a subtle but profound move. When your identity is tethered to something deeper, external approval loses its power to unsettle you. You still feel, you still grieve, but you no longer live by the crowd's verdict. There is responsibility here, too. Carrying this sacred weight requires courage, clarity, and purity of intent. It's not a one-time moment of being chosen. It's a lifelong stewarding. You'll be tested, not because you're failing, but because growth needs refining. Each difficulty is an invitation to greater clarity and to demonstrate that the trust placed in you is worthy. On a personal note, I've walked seasons where being misunderstood felt like exile. Over time, I learned that refuge wasn't outside, it was inside, a deliberate orientation toward truth. The people who stayed were those who matched the new rhythm. The ones who left made room for relationships that sustained the work. If you're in this space now, consider these practical moves. Protect your inner life with boundaries, curate your circle intentionally, and cultivate a daily practice that keeps you aligned to the source of your calling. Expect friction, prepare for solitude, and be tender with the part of you that still longs for belonging. But also remember, solitude is not absence. It's preparation. It's a disciplined clearing that gives you the capacity to hold more vision, more empathy, more steady leadership. Live that solitude not as a punishment, but as a sacred responsibility to be faithful to the work you were given. Live the message, the call to act and share. Everything you've been through has led here, to a place where your life is no longer an experiment, but an assignment. You simply are as I intended you to be, the voice says. That's not a comfortable self-congratulation, it's a summons. You're called to live out the change and to let it ripple outward. First, stop seeking permission to exist in your calling. You don't need others' approval to walk the path you've been shown. Your authority doesn't arise from consensus. It arises from alignment. Move with that confidence. Speak your truth not to convince, but to declare what you've been entrusted to steward. Second, the work is communal. Your story matters because it opens the door for someone else's awakening. When you share a word of clarity, when you model peace under pressure, you give permission for another person to risk their own step forward. That's how movements begin, not with spectacle, but with faithful lives that quietly change the tone around them. You'll be tempted to minimize what you've become, either out of humility or fear of standing out. Don't. There's a difference between arrogance and rightful presence. The latter honors responsibility. It uses voice to serve, not dominate. When you speak, let it be to heal, to guide, and to point back to the source of your strength. Practical living matters. Build rhythms that sustain you: rest, reflection, honest relationships, disciplined work. Set boundaries that guard your capacity to serve. When fatigue or doubt shows up, return to the basics. Small acts of obedience, quiet listening, and consistent care for your inner life. These tiny practices compound into a life that can carry influence without burning out. Finally, remember the ripple effect. A single honest word at the right time can wake a sleeping heart. A boundary kept faithfully can model dignity for someone else. Your presence can be the turning point in somebody's story. That's not pressure to perform. It's an invitation to steward what you've been given well. So move forward. Speak with care. Live with courage. Share what you've been given, not for your glory, but for others' awakening. Hold fast to the peace you've received, and let that peace guide every bold, small, and necessary step you take. Live by the light you carry, and invite others into the same steady, faithful way. Walk in that peace.